All right. Okay, everybody. Mike Ershin here, America's New Clothes. I'm glad that we were able to get a conversation in on the conversation with Cenk exactly a week ago today. Been about 100,000 views on that video at this point. And I feel, if I don't look at the comments with too much pain for myself, obviously people feel like Cenk just picked me up off the beach. I'm an uneducated Trump supporter, as we all are. I think it's worthwhile to revisit some of the points that are made in that interview, and so for that, I brought my good buddy Derek on here, and
hello everyone. Thanks for having me.
We're gonna kind of go through and parse through some of the comments that were made by Cenk during the interview and piece out some of what we think there could be a little bit more exploration on. But overall, very pleased to be able to have that debate, and hopefully we'll have many more. So thanks, Derek. Derek obviously has so much more background than I do in finance, a lot of experience, kind of seeing all the market conditions that created the market crash, right, in 2007, 2008. And can add a little bit more color to how we as Trump supporters look at the great effects on the economy. I think it's interesting that Cenk decided to go hard at me. You know, if you look at the context of the debate, right, it started out saying, well, you realize, Trump's not a real Republican. He has many issues that are different than Republicans on things. And I was able to quickly say, trade and immigration, and here's why. And that led into a full-on conversation that went all over the place. Right. But I think it's worth exploring some of those things. So, yeah. Derek, thanks for coming on, and sure. Maybe high level, other than attesting to my mental acumen and acuity over and beyond what some of the YouTube comments made, maybe you can kind of give some broad brush reactions that you had when you went through the interview. Yeah,
I think with regards to he started off with the war and tariffs, and that Trump wasn't a general Republican. He made no bones about that. Obviously, during his original election campaign, he was anti-war, right? He wanted to bring the troops home. On tariffs, he had made everyone know that we had been being screwed for so long, and he wanted to square the peg, right, and get that back to normal. I think he succeeded on that. Tariffs can be good. Clearly, everybody wants free trade. At the same time, right, if you're the one continually losing in the free trade battle, because of years of just susceptibility to just being taken advantage of, you have to correct that. And so, the main point that gets missed in all of this is, yes, the tax cuts are and can be and are disadvantageous to an overall economy if you don't have corresponding spending cuts. The one thing that always gets left out is that no corporation, unless they're subsidized by the government, like a Tesla or whatever, can continue for years and years and years in perpetuity to outspend what their revenue base is. That's a losing battle. Government, unfortunately, is not a corporation. They can just spend and spend and spend, thinking that there's always a money tree. So to his point, yes, the spending cuts have had a negative impact of the 1.5 or 1.9 trillion or whatever he was talking about. But if cuts had gone along with that, then tax cuts are advantageous to the people that they're meant to help. So right. in that regard, and then he misses the point on debt as well. One second, yeah, I know you want to get in. One point on the debt side, right? He conveniently leaves out that under Obama, he managed to double the debt from 10 to 20 trillion. Trillions. It's a lot of freaking money. Now, the comments were always, well, he took over a recession and a Great Depression, and that's true. But aspect, or the fact of the matter is that the actual debt itself increased dramatically under Obama on a year-over-year basis versus obviously what Trump has done. He talks about personal income hasn't increased in years. That's just flat out wrong. He could not be more wrong in that. Same with the unemployment thing. He said that Obama's unemployment, you have to admit, Obama's employment was lower than Trump's. No, it was not. It never, ever made it below, 4.5%, I think, or 4.6.
Yeah, magic wand, right? Obama said, "What are you going to do? Have a magic wand to fix it?
Wave at it and fix it, right?
Right."
So, I think it went from, I think Trump got it down to 3.5%, I believe, was the lowest. And he took over in January of 2017. So under Obama, it fell, right? It was 9.8, I think, or 10 point, I think it was 10 point something when he first took over, or when it, by October of his first year. And then he cut it in half. So, but it took him 5 years and 5 months to cut it by 46%. Trump did it in 5 months. Right. If you look at COVID-19, right, it jumped to 14.7. It's now at 7.9.
Right.
So, and personal income has risen. Again, we have to go back to pre-COVID because this is unsubstantiated what we've just gone through. But pre-COVID, he had increased wages by, I think it was 8.25%. So it increased by $5,000. So that was 1,047 under Obama and 407 under Bush. So combined, he tripled what those two did in 16 years. So it's just disingenuous, and to lead his viewers on, they just hammer that thinking, oh, that's the talking points. That's what we hear every day. They don't actually go and investigate and research it. And
they know that the economy is the main driver of election decisions, right? So,
correct.
And as well they should, it's Clinton that said it's the economy, stupid. It's
right. Yeah. Thanks to James Carville. Yeah.
But there were probably a number of different ways I could have argued that point to in the process, like net people on welfare, right? The number of people who went on to welfare versus the number of people who went off. And I'm not going to say the actual numbers, but that has been a great driver of showing that, in fact, this idea that Cenk kept hammering, that 83% of all of the kind of repatriation money, my point that the fact that we let these companies bring money back that they had earned overseas, every iPhone sold in Europe, the money is in an Ireland bank account. Right? So when you're able to repatriate that at less than 30%, and get a one-time repatriation at only a 10% tax, my argument was that money clearly has been used to bolster the economy here. Right. And I think that's a New York Times talking point that's been pushed out. 83% of these tax cuts and repatriation went to the top 1%. Right. And I think that's only half the story, right? Because that can trickle down into jobs. Right. Those top 1% that are basically making investments. And I don't think it was right for him to suggest that the top 1% just took all that money off the table and didn't put it into the economy. You see the results.
Right. And again, he argues against himself, because if the tax cuts didn't work and the repatriation didn't work, then why did middle class average household income increased from $60,973 in January of 17 to $65,976 as of August? Last data we had was August of last year.
Right.
So an 8.2% increase. The average since 1999 all the way through 2016 was 2.7. So again, 6 points higher. So roughly 3 times higher, 2.5 times higher than the last previous 16 years. But again, so to your point with regards to the repatriation, did it work? If the tax cuts didn't increase that average household income, and repatriating that money and paying higher wages didn't do it, then what did it? Was it just magic? Did all of a sudden just wages went up and nobody can explain why? So they won't ever go at that point, because again, it's self-defeating for them, because they end up in a circular argument with themselves, never being able to get out of the middle of the firing squad. So, And then there's what's called the Gini coefficient. So Gini coefficient, it measures income equality. So under Bush, it was 0.47. Under Obama, it was 0.48. Under Trump, it's ticked to 0.49. So if you and the largest, the highest Gini coefficients are the blue state of New York, DC, and Massachusetts at 0.52 and 0.53 and 54. Or 0.53 is the highest. Then if you go to the red states of, say, Nebraska, Wyoming, Utah, Alaska, you're at 0.42 to 0.44. So blue states are run horribly, as we all know, generally speaking. Therefore, and their income inequality is grossly higher than in red states in middle America. And they tax the rich, right, supposedly more. Nobody ever freely gives up more taxes, right? Massachusetts had passed a thing that, back in 2014, I think, or 16, saying, hey, if you want to just voluntarily pay more in taxes, feel free. I think it was less than 1% of all of the wealthiest of the wealthy decided to pay more, and it was a minimal amount. So, I mean, again, I could get in with him all day long, and he can come with his facts or whatever on the economy. And by no means am I an economist, and I don't pretend to be, because the economists are in a classroom and it's all theory. You cannot take classroom economics, generally speaking, into an economy and have it work. That's why it works in the classroom. It doesn't work in the real economy, because you can't test and qualify behavior. If a tax goes up on me, it may change my behavior. If tax goes up on you, it may not. Right. And so you can't quantify that, unfortunately.
Although even Econ 1, right, the first, basic supply and demand, I think works in general pretty well for wages with regards to labor pool supplies. Right. Yeah. So the fact that when we say that, it was Cesar Chavez who was most against illegal immigration, and this was a United Farm Workers guy, right? The guy that we herald both on the right and the left as fighting for the ag workers. And his biggest concern was that there would be an increase in labor supply that was, undocumented folks coming over the border and being able to work for less. Right. And thus he knew that to protect their wages and conditions, the best thing he could do was ensure that it was a domestic labor supply that was doing that. So, and that requires no kind of macroeconomic thought. That requires no kind of Keynesian Paul Krugman look at the world, right? Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just basic stuff, and you see that. Yeah. So, what are some of the other points he made? I mean, he quickly, when I talked about the Brazilification of California, right? And he said, of course, Brazil is run by a right wing. Right. Fascist dictator, and he's speaking of Bolsonaro, who of course was elected in 2019. Right. And he doesn't speak to the many leftists that have run Brazil for the last 20, 30 years. So I thought that was pretty disingenuous, and he was just, it was just a zinger for him. Right.
Yeah. I mean, they became, going back to the 30s and 40s, they've been primarily run by military, kind of a military coup or military control. And heck, I mean, almost every, it seems like if you go back and look at the history of them, pretty much every president or they just passed into presidency, I think in the 60s or something. But basically every leader of Brazil or leading party has been just overwhelmed with corruption, arrests and trials and everything else. So, they had become a big exporter of arms back in the 80s when they were sending arms to Iran and the Soviet Union. Now, I don't know many right-wing groups who are, partnering with Iran and the Soviet bloc to give them weapons. So, I mean, they were communist in their views. Communism is not a right-wing, ideology by any means. So again, he was just disingenuous there. He needs to study Brazil history more. I'm not an expert in it, but a quick cursory view shows that it's not run by right wings. Yeah, the way that they are labeled as far as their party is considered conservative party or right wing party. If you look at their policies based on what we know as what is right wing, they're not right wing. So they're I think 4/5 of all their hospitals are public institutions. They spend more money on social services than the military. So I mean, you look at a lot of these things that they're socialists. They're not right wing. So again, but it's a great talking point. You can say that Bolsonaro is a right-wing extremist and whatever. It just defies logic with regards to what led to him getting there. Because
Right.
even he takes on he is more religious. He does talk about religion needs to kind of come back into Brazil, and we need to add more money to the military and stuff like that. But true overall policies, he's not a right-wing extremist by any means. If he's anything, he's middle-of-the-road conservative.
Right. Which for them is a move towards the right.
Correct. Yeah.
So did you have any other key points that you wanted to address when we talked about the economy? Because I want to get into some of the reactions to what we talked about with COVID, but I want to make sure we're still on track with some of the other key kind of misguided thoughts we saw there. Because I'd say a good half to 2/3 of the interview had been focused on.
I think just
the economy.
Yeah, and I think quickly on the stock buybacks and the repatriation of the money really quick. When that money does come back, they obviously give it in wages. Did they keep more for themselves? Sure, of course they did. They've been harboring that money overseas forever, and so to have that one-time 10% tax, they're going to. But putting that money into development and expansion, and so you did see, especially in 2018, a very high increase in R&D spending. That tapered off in 2019, and one could look at, well, why? Well, Democrats had taken over control of Congress in 2018, so 2019 is their first year. They control the purse strings, right? They ended up putting in and enacting things that made people then suspect, going, all right, do I really want to spend this money? What's coming up? Is there going to be a reversal in this tax rate or whatever? So, now that Dems are in control. So you could argue the point. He argues a lot of counterfactuals. Well, you can't, he makes a comment, you can't go back and prove otherwise because we're in the reality that we're in. So I think if he took the time to truly understand economics and see how a dollar is spent and how the dollar cycles through the system as well. Because the belief in socialism is that for every $1 that goes out to a welfare recipient, $1.50 is going to come back. If that was the case, fire everybody from all their jobs. Let's just print money and give people money, and all of a sudden we're going to have a 50% increase. Right? We'll pay off the debt in no time. It defies logic, and they don't want to track that. They don't want to spend the time to educate themselves on that because it gets too into the weeds for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's interesting because he definitely, Cenk describes himself as a Republican until the Iraq War. So you would assume that he didn't have any grand machinations on some fundamental economic policy difference.
Right.
He says he's most against corruption and wage stagnation, but in reality, I mean, if you're the greatest thing you can do to fight wage stagnation is to not be a globalist. Right?
Correct.
If you want a domestic labor supply, domestic supply chains, you're going to do your best job there of fighting wage stagnation, which I agree. Wage stagnation has been a real thing, but that's been mostly because neocon policy has had us so focused on, the corporate profit system that basically says if we can outsource everything to, Southeast Asia in terms of manufacturing and
right.
do all of our IT outsourcing to India, of course, you're not going to see wages rise here because
right.
you're simply not buying locally.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No. And you have to look also at the minimum wage acts, and it goes all the way back to the Davis-Bacon Act, which was racist in the way that it was instituted. Unions didn't want black laborers coming in and, assuming that they were going to drive the wages down. So they enacted the minimum wage laws. A lot of times those minimum wage laws today actually still impact the minority community because they're usually jobs in the minimum wage category generally is going to those with either a lower education or that's just trying to get into the workforce. And
right.
if you then raise wages and deny someone the ability to get that skill, then it's going to more adversely impact them. And so,
sure.
Minimum wage, do we all believe that there's some type of standard of living that we all want to accomplish? Sure. But at the same time, it's a contract. If I want to pay you to make widgets and I think that job's worth $10 an hour, if you decide to take out, not that I'm mandated to pay you 10, but if I say, I think your value is $10 an hour, it's up to you to decide, well, I'm actually worth $12 an hour, right? Or do you say, yeah, $10 is good, I'll take it, right? But that's a contract between me and you. There should not be a force where you're forced to take a wage and I'm forced to offer a wage to you, because that throws out of alignment the equilibrium of the supply and demand.
Sure. And especially, I mean, this conversation comes up all the time now with AB 5 and the PRO Act, as we're looking at, the idea of a minimum wage and here's what a minimum salary should be for the year. Right. I mean, people are working multiple jobs to fit their lifestyle in flexible ways. And in doing so, I mean, if you're talking about a set wage, it's just a very old way of thinking.
Sure.
The irony of the progressives, the whole notion of the surging that happens with Uber, right? That, okay, we need more cars on the road, so everybody who's working right now is going to make a lot more money per hour because we're incentivizing people to work during these times. That was the genius of Uber, and that's why it was never something. These guys that are trying to get gig workers to be unionized here in California. Every Uber driver I've ever talked to does not want a set of hours, 40 hours a week that they have to work. They like the flexibility of clock in, clock out. Right. I'm feeling well, got to take my daughter to school. I'm doing this, whatever it is. Right. So I think it's completely disingenuous and fundamentally against economic liberty. And that's what we're about. That's what we're all about.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then just the last point on inflation. I mean, he's right. Right. I mean, if you keep rates at a historically low level for long enough, then yes, you're going to interest rates. Yeah, you're going to have rampant inflation at some point. I mean, there's a reason why Zimbabwe has $1 trillion note, right? They just let it get out of control. So it's a fine line to walk that the Federal Reserve has to do. But my belief has always been, of course, once we went off the gold standard, is when inflation started to move up dramatically. You go back to 1913 or 1917, the value of the dollar has depreciated by 97%. So what was $1 then is worth 3 cents today. So you're buying less with your money. So that's where, again, going back to Trump trying to raise wages, and if he's raised wages by 8%, that's outpacing what we're told is inflation.
Right.
But, core inflation. Yeah. And of course, we can get into how the Federal Reserve rates inflation. I disagree with it entirely. I think that, if I'm going to the store and my gas has gone up that I put in my car and my goods are costing more that I buy at the store, and they're only counting one of those components in the real core inflation, it's disingenuous, right? I mean, people know if their $1 buys them the same amount of goods at the store than it did last week or last month or last year. And if you take into account everything we spend money on, inflation it's more or less outpacing wage increases. So he is right on that. But there's 100 different ways to skin that cat as to why. Right.
And I was surprised. I mean, for as much as he wanted to talk about interest rates, there was no mention of all the changes to the Treasury with regards to the Federal Reserve at the end of April. And, while you and I thought it was one of the biggest stories on the heels of COVID, there was no discussion of, how that bolstered American economic sovereignty.
Right.
So we could probably talk to that. That's probably another whole story.
Yeah.
I wanted to go through some of the, obviously, I think some of the worst feedback or the gnarliest feedback was my comment of the word gnarly, the fact that I said a mere 200,000 COVID deaths. When people say that, they were for sure taking it out of context.
Sure.
I had said it from a context of, Gavin Newsom, the 15 days to stop the spread. We were told we were going to be looking at 3.6 million deaths in California. So when I said mere, I was saying, as it relates to the projected 3.6 million deaths that was
Right.
used to identify and shut down the economy.
Right.
In no way was I trying to be, apathetic
Sure.
in any way
Right.
towards the death and suffering that COVID has caused. And so
Right.
it's frustrating to me that people took these little sound bites out of context. But I think commensurate with, knowing that we have this survival rate of, 99.7%,
Right.
across all ages. And,
Right.
for instance, for President Trump's age, a 94% survival rate. So, he had a 1 in 16 chance of quickly popping
Right.
out of the hospital. And sure enough, he did last
Right.
night.
Right.
I was just suggesting that the lockdowns are not commensurate with the risks that coronavirus poses.
Correct.
And I've gotten so much blowback on social media for making that argument.
Right.
And yet I still think it stands. And I still think that, when people say, well, show me your data. I mean, I think a lot of that data is even baked into the CDC.gov site. You can
Correct.
see the way
Right.
that they've identified cases, and they've had a more aggressive way of identifying cases.
Right.
And I think the hardest thing for me to see him argue from a COVID standpoint was that immediately he said that Trump had just an abysmal response. And
Right.
what were his points? That we needed to have contact tracing and immediate testing.
Right.
And I would tell him, if he really wants to win over hearts and minds, the greatest number of walkaway stories that I've seen, we know Brandon Straka's
Correct. Yeah.
hashtag walkaway movement.
Right.
I try to read as many of those as I can, because as we are in the battle to win over hearts and minds to the good that Trump's policies have done, I always like to see what was the crystallizing moment for people who walked away from the Democrats and came over
Right.
to the, we're quote unquote red pilled.
Right.
And I would say greater than, and this is intersectionally across all races and genders. The people who were tuned in, obviously out of fear, were tuned in to what's going on with COVID, what's going on with coronavirus, March,
Right.
April, May. And so a lot of people were tuned in the news, and they were getting as many news sources as they could. And
Right.
so many people said, I recognized that the media was the virus
Right.
when I saw the daily transparent updates that
Yeah.
Trump and Birx and Fauci were doing, and here they were twisting his words and saying you didn't do this, and oh, what about this? And I was looking at it, and that was a moment of aha for
Sure.
so many people. And so for him to hammer on that as well, clearly, and that's obviously what the progressives are trying to get Biden to be doing
Right.
in these debates, is hammer Trump on coronavirus. But
Yeah.
when you really ask him what his plan is, you don't really see a huge
No.
delta from what Trump has done.
Well, and I think, again, starting out of that, on that part, he started out with a counterfactual, right? That if you had done this, right, lives would have been saved. You
Right.
don't know that. I mean, you just don't know, right? And I would probably reckon to imagine that prior to January 24th or 26th, whenever the first, case was here, that Cenk had never heard of contact tracing. He probably had no idea what it was. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd never heard of it, right? And for South Korea and these other countries to go and implement it or do whatever, then, okay, great. But what was their contact tracing? It's been shown in studies that contact tracing can overwhelm the system if you're not quarantining people, you're not locking down. So the only way to properly canvas and contact trace is to lock everybody down. So then you're not overwhelming the number of workers that are out there having to chase all these people around. So that's been looked at and researched and concluded as well. But who shut down the local economies? Trump didn't.
No.
Right? Trump may have suggested, yes, we should potentially go into quarantine, but he didn't say, governors, you must shut down.
That's right.
The two weeks to flatten the curve has turned into, what are we in, 7 months now? The curve has been flat. If you look at the death count, it's literally flatlined for the last 3 months. So we had the spike in cases, but that also correlated, as you had indicated earlier, to the rise in testing. And the hospitalization. So the hospitalizations have gone down. As of, I think it was Thursday of last week, looking at positive cases reported on college campuses, there's been over 70,000 reported positive cases on college campuses. Hospitalizations, 3 people.
Right.
So the fear mongering, right? Because now they don't really show you the death count, right? Only when we hit a milestone, 175,000, 190, 200. But they overwhelm everybody in the fear of, look at all the cases. Well, of course, cases are going up. Plus, as it was noted, that there's 4 coronaviruses that will very likely show up as a positive for coronavirus, the COVID-19. So if you got a flu shot, you're going to test positive. If you had an antibody that you had it previously, had no idea you had it, you're going to show up as a positive. And then there's T-cell immunity, right? That'll show that somehow our bodies, prior to the disease, the virus ever making it here, we had antibodies or T-cell immunity already to it. So that's almost 50%. They've either had the antibodies that now combat it and they just handed it on their own, or 30% roughly of this T-cell immunity. So over 50% of the people, according to the most recent studies, basically are already immune to the virus. The virus is weakening, right? There's a reason why deaths aren't going up. For the fact of, one, it didn't mutate a lot, so it has been curbed. Alex Berenson covers this, on his in his Twitter account.
Yeah, he's got great stuff.
Hammered from the left, right? Because his facts, or the facts that he presents using CDC data, using other countries' data, doesn't conform with the feelings that they have that everybody's just going to drop dead, and we got to protect everybody. So to your point on getting hammered on the comments, if you're not shedding tears for every life that has been lost, you're an evil person, right? The left hates you, right? How can you not understand what's going on? Unfortunately, the facts do not hold up for them. If you had never heard of COVID-19, would you even know that we have a high death flu season? No, probably not, right? I mean, CNN went in December saying that this was going to be very likely a very hard and tough flu season. Well, if you look at the data, right, 200-something thousand deaths. I mean, the good thing is it
he said excess deaths.
Yeah, excess deaths. And so
you can't tell me that we had our worst flu, or that our best flu season just came about. I mean,
correct.
There was some misallocation of that disease there.
Correct. And so if you look at the deaths that were, I guess, normally would have been related to the flu, those got pushed into COVID-19. If you died of cancer, right, the cancer actually took your life, but you had COVID-19, it's classified as a COVID-19 death, right? Birx came out in April and said that's how it was going to be. She didn't specifically use cancer, but she just said if you're presumed to have had it, meaning you had symptoms of it, but were never tested positive, or if you were positive, that you're going to be labeled as a COVID-19 death. No other country on the planet does that.
Right.
So it's just disingenuous to sit there and say that, he could have done something different. If you look at Lawrence Livermore Labs, one of the most respected in the world, sure, they came out and said in June it was estimated that without the travel restrictions, they said, by Trump restricting the travel to China and the EU, right, that if you took into account those countries and areas' case fatality rate, that without closing travel to those countries, we would have approximately 720,000 deaths. So it drastically slowed the communication and transmission of the disease by shutting down.
Yep.
As you pointed out in the interview with him, right? De Blasio and Cuomo, come on down. New York's open for business. Pelosi in San Francisco, come on down to Chinatown. Let's celebrate the new year. I mean,
That's
even
right.
The health commissioner in New York City was saying, yeah, get out in the streets, go to your restaurants, whatever. So then, and another thing here's the CDC data as well, and WHO. So because we aggressively list the COVID-19 deaths, we rank 10th in the world in deaths per 1 million people. If you took out just the state of New York, we dropped to 47th.
Right.
So so there's no other industrialized country that's behind us. So just removing New York. So
Cuomo was really enjoying the spotlight, but he made some really poor decisions to
correct and
to put those COVID patients back into these senior centers.
Right. And I think it was I forget his first name, but was it Leonidas or whatever, the virologist or epidemiologist at Stanford?
Oh,
he was saying,
yeah,
he was saying back in March, and it's on video, that in a normal flu season, about 8% of the elderly, being in nursing homes or in congregate care facilities or whatever, die of the flu. Right.
Yeah.
He said then, I don't expect, or I don't know what his exact words were, but he's basically saying that I believe that when this is all said and done, it'll be roughly the same. Guess what it is today? 8%. Right. And it probably could have been lower if you didn't stick these unfortunate, contaminated people back into the nursing homes.
That's right.
So, I mean, we've tested over, I think, 105 million tests according to the WHO or CDC. So we're 30% of our population has been tested. No other country has come remotely close to that. So of course we're going to have more confirmed cases. But again, look at the deaths. Another thing, the worst stat that we have is we're at average to the world on case fatality rate of 4% of case fatality rate. If you look at the IFR, we are 0.63%. According to the WHO, the average across the world is 0.94. So there's 38 countries higher than us in that respect.
Are you making a distinction between case fatality rate and
IFR,
infection fatality rate?
Correct.
Infection fatality rate. And so what's the distinction there?
So the case fatality rate, we're at average, at 4%, average to the world. The IFR, the infection fatality rate, is 0.63% for the U.S. compared to 0.94%. That's based on the WHO data, 0.94% of the world average. So let's see, we had a 1.18% in May, so we've cut that in half today. So we're moving in the right direction. Everybody, luckily, is moving in the right direction, but we're moving in the right direction on that. So your total mortality rate, and looking at your total population to total deaths, we rank 37th. So the UK, Brazil, Belgium, France are all above us, and that includes New York. If you took New York out, we'd be further back. So again, you go through and you look at the masks. I mean, everybody believes that masks work. The WHO did a study last year, and they had 10 separate controlled and randomized studies done. Their conclusion was, and I quote, "No evidence that wearing a mask is effective in reducing transmission of the virus," meaning any of the viruses, the coronaviruses. So, they were looking at in pandemics and endemics. So, the belief that these masks work, it may protect you, but the viruses, it's not going to protect against. So and people say, well, the doctors and medical staff wear them. Yes, they wear them in a sterile environment, right? When they're not wanting to infect a patient, but the transmission of it. I mean, you can look at a lot of people
they're sealed N95s. They're not high pore fabrics.
Correct. And even the N95 boxes say not meant to reduce the effectiveness, right, or transmission of coronavirus or virus.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, you and I have our own reasons as to why the mask thing is being pushed, right? But they're just ineffective. They don't work. I mean,
so we're hearing believe the science. Well, the science indicates all these things,
right?
But it's a nice top line argument that doesn't necessarily give you. It's low information consumer of news and voter is really underserved by these kinds of high level talking points. Right.
Yeah. And then the WHO went on in what I guess is called the literature review, which I think summarizes all their studies. And they said, and I quote, "Reusable cloth face masks are not recommended." That was last year. So up until March of 2020, literally every study that had been done across the world showed they were ineffective in transmission. But then all of a sudden now, Texas A&M, I think, came out with a paper over in the UK. Like all of a sudden, they're effective. What changed? Oh, it's an election year, right? Oh, it's about control. You got to wear a mask, right? And if you don't wear a mask, you get shamed because you're going to kill your neighbor. I mean, it's ridiculous, and the science just is not there for that.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, we got the VP debates coming up Wednesday night, and we have we have tons of other stuff to talk about.
Right.
And I think I appreciate that. Ironically, the name of Cenk's show on TYT is The Conversation. Where was it in between conversation and debate? I mean, I
Right.
don't know, with limited time and to try to talk about the economy and coronavirus, obviously, we get left to just a few zingers here and there,
Right.
and it's frustrating to me that obviously if you're the host in Cenk's case, you get to shut somebody down, have the final word, and then move on to another point. So
Right.
it has that feel like there's okay, here's the final word,
Right.
punch out and move on. But I appreciate you doing a little bit of a postmortem with me, and
Sure.
encouraging other people to do their own
Yeah.
research. I think
Exactly.
that these kinds of things, I mean, we can't have shows that are for the right and shows that are for the left. We need
Right.
as much
Middle
crossover
ground.
as we can. And so I tried to be as I don't know, warm as possible
Sure.
with Cenk,
Oh,
without trying to say, oh no, you're dead wrong. I mean, he had no problem
Right.
telling me I was dead
Exactly.
wrong.
I think you
But
both,
but I,
yeah, I think you both came across as, yeah, this is a conversation, but if you don't say you're wrong on every single topic, right? Because the other
Sure.
person, I mean, sure, they may be wrong on a point, right? Or whatever. Maybe their fact is wrong. Maybe they said 13 when the real number was 18 or whatever. But that's what shuts down debate, right? But, and again,
Right.
and as you had said, to all his viewers, if they do happen to see this show, I would encourage you to say, look, I'm going to take what Cenk said. I'm going to write down his points. I'm going to take what Mike said, or now me on this. I'm going to write those down, and I'm going to go
Back out.
research them.
Right.
Because so many of us on the right and on the left, we hear what we want to hear. It's a confirmation bias, right? We hear our
Sure.
group think, and man, it makes us feel good that, yeah, he thinks just like me. And we
Right.
don't research it. And as much as people hate Glenn Beck, right? He's a libertarian, right? He always has said, and going back to 2002 or 2003, whenever he started his show, do your own research. Don't take what we are saying as fact, right? Do your own research, because that's going to lead you down the road, right? It's going to take you from point A to point B to point C, to where now you're starting to form your own opinions rather than taking the opinions of others and now going out and saying, well, that's fact. Because
Right.
as we just showed, Cenk was wrong, right? Or I shouldn't say wrong. He was disingenuous to some degree on a lot of his points.
Sure.
Right. And to be able to have cross debate and be able to challenge those. And again, you guys only had 14 or 15 minutes. Like, you could flip through your notes and be like, well, hold on, here's the evidence that says otherwise. You're left to just have to be armed with it in your head. Right. That's what makes some people great at debate, because they are just a wealth of knowledge and have,
Right.
have these facts in their head and can cite sources left and right. One, because they've done it way more than you and I have. But two, no offense to you, they're smarter than I am.
Right. Well, I prefer to try to say, instead of, ending up being a URL slinger between two opposing parties, I prefer to say, for you to make that point, you would need to be able to show a statistically significant data point that would answer this question. It's like, I feel like people need to lead with questions. I mean, in
Sure.
the case of coronavirus, we have to say, I think when we look at this death count, I think we always would forget, well, how many people die every year? And
Right.
show me the histogram of people's death through the years.
Right.
And, how many people between 70 and 75 die? What are the
Right.
reasons in which they die? You
Right.
ask those questions. And so you establish what is the baseline for normalcy.
Right.
And then you say, okay, so what's the delta? What is this virus vector that's moving through our population doing to change those things? And rather than saying, well, 3.6%, 1.8%, you're saying, let's now go look for data from trusted, reputable sources that can answer the questions for us.
Right.
And I wish more people would do that. Instead,
Well,
people are now being told what to think, and
Sure.
then given the data for why to think it, instead
Right.
of people being told how to think and
Right.
to go source their own data. And that's,
Right.
I mean, I think that's what
Well, I think you brought up
we can have any impact on 1 to 10 people in having
Yeah.
these kinds of conversations.
Right.
I think, I count that as a success.
Yeah, well, I think to your earlier point that you made about the walkaway stuff is, I mean, I've said this to you, I've said it to a lot of people, is I think the Great Awakening occurred when the shutdown happened. I think it forced people to sit there and have to watch it, because they can't go outside, right? Or they can, but they can't go anywhere. So they're forced to watch TV ad nauseum.
Right.
Choose your network. I don't care what network you watch, right? if all of a sudden you start saying, wait, hold on, something doesn't make sense here, right? And let me just go hear the other side, right? And okay, that may not make total sense, but at least it gives another opinion, right? Another viewpoint. And then you start going down that research rabbit hole, is you do start having people go, wait a minute, yeah, we're locked down for a 99.98% overall survivability rate. I mean, we weren't wearing masks when tuberculosis is killing 1.5 million people a year, right? It's like when we have a flu outbreak previously, right? H1N1, SARS, like all that. So I do think that people now have, one, higher distrust in the media. And the Trump going into the hospital with COVID-19 is just case in point exhibit A, right? The hysteria now that he's out and he takes his mask off. They're like, oh my God, he took his mask off. Well, yeah, he's now quarantined. There's nobody around him and he's outside, right? But they still have to keep that fear going, and it's going to backfire. And it has backfired. I think it's going to backfire more.
All right. So, hey, you're awesome. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for watching the interview or the conversation a few times and taking a look at this stuff.
Of course.
Maybe we can have some more conversations. Obviously, we got, we're just over 20 some odd days till the election, and there's plenty of stuff to talk about. And so I really appreciate you coming on. And,
thanks for having me.
And being part of it. And hey, folks, if you found this interesting, please, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you have any interest in having a conversation with any of us about this stuff, get in touch and let's do it.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one.